Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We are overjoyed to have a packed room. We are working on more chairs for those of you who are standing, so they should be coming shortly. Thanks for your patience. In the meantime, if you do have an empty seat, just let these people along the wall know. Get to know a new friend. But I want to welcome you all to Communicate to Succeed. That is the session you are in. We are very happy to be streaming this session live to our friends in the States who could not join us in beautiful Boston. Welcome, welcome. This is Communicate to Succeed, a deep dive here at the NCSL Legislative Summit. I'm glad you all joined us. And I'm going to kick off the session with a very quick poll. Since this session is all about communication, we're going to gauge where we are in the audience. You're here for one reason or another, and we want to know why. So, who in the audience thinks that communication is their strongest tool in their toolbox? You would put it at the top of your resume. You think you're pretty darn good at communication. Just a show of hands. Show of hands. This is not a game. No, if you think you're good at it, you own it. We want to know. All right. We got a few confident people up here. Well, hopefully we can teach you something. Certainly, if you can teach the rest of the room something, we welcome your comments throughout the session. All right, who's kind of mediocre at communication? You'd put yourself middle of the road, middle of the pack. Yeah, okay, good chunk of the room. And who is at this session because you got to look up the definition of communication? You have no idea. You need a lot of help in the communications department, which is okay. We need to know our weaknesses, right? That's good. Good. Now, there's a lot of people who didn't participate in that little exercise, so I will just treat that as an internal exercise that you did. I'm going to very quickly introduce our two wonderful speakers today who are going to impart a lot of wisdom on everyone who's in the room. This will be a 3-part session, so we are glad you've joined us for the next couple hours. And the first part will be led by Mariana Swallow. She has been a communications expert for the past 15 years, and she is going to first talk about and provide you skills for immediate use on crafting a compact and compelling talk. Then the third part, she will take the reins back and she will talk about using effective visuals in your communication. We live in a visual world, we all know that, and how can you best use that when you're communicating? In the middle of Mariana's 2 parts, we have Senator Bill O'Neill here from New Mexico. Woo! Senator O'Neill has been in the legislature since 2009 as a rep and then became a senator in 2013. And he, in his other life, because some of you may not know, the grand sum that New Mexico lawmakers make is $0. Well, plus per diem, but no salary. So, a little factoid for you about legislatures. He is an author and a poet in his other life. So he is going to talk a little bit about crafting a story to support your message. And how do you do that? What are some tips and tools you can use to do that? So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Mariana. Please welcome her.
Thank you. Thank you. Can everyone hear me okay? There we go. Thank you, Stacy, for that lovely introduction. Happy Tuesday, everyone. How's it going? Good. Oh, you're a lovely, enthusiastic audience. I'm so happy to hear that. Welcome to the Deep Dive, Communicate to Succeed. As Stacy mentioned, my name is Mariana Swallow, and I'm happy to share some of these tips with you today to make your message more concise, but also more compelling. Because I know in what you do, depending on your role, lots of times you're pressed for time or the person you're speaking to is pressed for time. This is a quick overview of what we're going to see today in the 3 parts. So I will take you through part 1. We'll talk about crafting a compelling message, i.e. how to get your point across. This might be a good time to put your phone on vibrate. Thank you for that reminder over to my left. Part 2, You'll hear from Senator Bill O'Neill from the great state of New Mexico. He's going to talk to you about storytelling. And then, as Stacy mentioned, I'll talk to you about creating effective visuals when you do need some kind of visual to support your message. So real quick, some logistics here. We are scheduled to go till about 12:30. Because the senator and I have lots of information to share with you in the short amount of time, we are not scheduling any bio breaks. So if nature calls, please exit the room and go answer that call. We'll be here till 12:30. Also, if you happen to see a long-lost friend in here and you two need to catch up, please hold side conversations until the end, or you're welcome to step outside during one of these parts. And then another little notation for those of you who were able to get a seat at a table. If you look around the tables, you'll see that there are some worksheets which we'll use during this first part. There will be worksheets later and for our third part, which will be passed out at the correct times. You'll also notice on your table there are pipe cleaners, and for the lucky few who were brave enough to sit up at the front, there's some Play-Doh on your table. I have no secret mission for these. We are not going to do a team building exercise. These are there for you to fidget with. So if you need to fidget with something while we're talking, tactile learners usually do, go ahead and grab a piece of Play-Doh or what do you call those things? Pipe cleaners, and twist them into a spiral, make a little house, whatever makes sense to you. Okay, let's jump into part one. Creating concise and compelling messages. I know that what you do, as I mentioned, you tend to be very busy and very pressed for time, so we want to make sure that our message is landing with its recipient. This didn't always used to be the case. There are so many challenges we have these days because the working world has gotten so different. That's the only way I know how to put it since when I started. When I got out of college, the internet had not yet proliferated, email was not a thing, and I now have younger people who work for me who have asked me, I am not kidding, with no trace of irony, what did you guys do before the internet? And my answer to that is always, we got up and we walked over to their desk and we talked to each other. We typed up memos, we printed them on our laser printers, and then we walked them over to that other person, right? Does anyone besides me remember those days? Okay, most of you, yay, excellent. So it's important to understand the challenges we have in communication today. We have more ways to communicate than ever. There's email, there's Twitter, there's Instagram. So there's more distractions. But we also have more generations working together in the work world at any time than we ever have had before in history. So our world today is very different than it was even 15 or 20 years ago. So we need to understand the challenges. We're going to think about who's receiving our message. And then I'll give you some tips to make your messages concise and compelling. Okay? First of all, I want to understand who's in the room and your roles. Raise your hand, please, if you are a legislator. Excellent. Okay. Raise your hand, please, if you are a staffer. Excellent. Good split here. Raise your hand if you fall into an other category. You don't want to say what your job is. Okay. Excellent. So here's why I ask that. I want to know who's in my audience, but also I know that depending on your role, you will bring unique challenges to your role in communication, but also to the people who need to speak to you. And we're going to talk about that. I want to demonstrate just how difficult it can be to get a message across when we are working with people, such as legislators, who maybe only have 2 or 3 minutes to listen to what you have to say. Maybe they have 30 seconds. Maybe you got to be really quick. So someone from the front here, does someone have an idea of something they might need to communicate, maybe something to say about a bill or constituents or something going on in the district? Can I have a volunteer to help me out here? Not all at once, you guys. Come on. I'm going to stand here until 5 o'clock unless I got a volunteer. All right, this gentleman here, come on up. Oh, yeah. Stairs are right here. Come on, join me. And let me grab a mic for you. Is this on? Yep.
Hello.
Tell us your name, please, and your role.
Corey Smith. I work for LPRO, Legislative Policy Research in the Pennsylvania House.
All right, Corey, thank you for joining me. You will be rewarded. Do you have a message or something you might need to communicate to someone at work?
Yeah, so when
Hang on. Hold on to that message.
Okay.
I want you to tell me this message in 20 seconds. Go.
Okay. So we have 3 legislative recommendations that I have for you. We can base your bill off a federal bill and or another state's bill. All right, you're.
You got 4 seconds. Keep going.
Oh my God, you're killing me.
Time. Okay, we want to get that same message. This time you have 10 seconds. Go.
Okay, I have a bill in mind that we can do for you, and we can manipulate it whether you would like to do it. Oh my God, this is impossible.
Corey, same message, 5 seconds. Go. Corey, if you're going to be in front of a legislator, I think laughing isn't going to help. Okay, 3.5 seconds. Go.
Okay, so we're going to do the bill for you.
Time.
Just like, okay.
Okay. Hang on. Corey, thank you for playing. Let's give Corey a round of applause because that was brave to come up here. Thank you, Corey. Oh, geez, I'm so sorry. Valuable audio equipment. Joe, I'm sorry. This microphone rolls a lot. Stay. Okay, so what did we see there? Why do you think I had Corey do that? It wasn't to shame him or publicly embarrass him in front of you, but what did you see in that exercise? What do we take away from that? Yeah.
Good morning, everyone. I'm with Kenya Clancy with the National Organization of Black Elected Legislative Women. What I took away from that exercise was he was confident until he figured out that there was a time constraint put on the message.
Okay.
And it took away his ability to think through what you were asking.
Okay, so with the time constraint, she notices that he was confident until he had the time constraint, but it took away his ability to get the message across. Yes, but I also want to illustrate that sometimes you might only have 20 or 30 seconds to get your message across. Raise your hand if you've experienced that. Pretty much everyone in this room, yeah, okay? So what's the point? We need to understand how to think through our message before we get in front of that person and find out we only have 20 or 30 seconds, okay? So we want to make our talks concise. How do we do that? Let's focus on being concise with our message. Everyone knows this quote Shakespeare once famously said in Hamlet, "Brevity is the soul of wit." My husband says, keep it short. But we don't just want to be short, right? We want to have an impact. If I wanted to be short, I could pretty much say nothing and get out of there in 30 seconds. So we want to think through what it is we need to say and what we need to say that needs to land with its intended recipient. And we talked before about the challenges. And as I mentioned, each of you, depending on your role, you bring special gifts to the table, but you also have certain challenges inherent in what you do, but also inherent in whoever you are speaking to. So I have a couple of analogies here. If those of you who are legislators, you're kind of like Jerry Mouse. Everyone remember the Tom and Jerry cartoons? The cat was always chasing after the mouse. He never got the mouse. Or he almost got him, and then the mouse would get away. Well, the legislator's like Jerry Mouse. Everybody wants to get his attention. Everyone is chasing after him or her. That means everybody else is Tom the cat, trying to chase down this person or thing that is incredibly difficult to pin down. The rest of you, staffers, lobbyists, researchers, I was thinking about this, and I know part of your gift, but also a challenge, is that you're very smart, you have a lot of information in your head, and you need to get it out to whoever you need to speak to. But inherent in that, you've got a lot of information, but you might not have all the time to get all of it across. You might think all the data is incredibly important, but your recipient might only want 1 or 2 key points. So I was thinking about this, and I went, well, who in fiction is kind of like that? Who has a lot of information in their head that they need to get across to everybody else? My first thought was Sheldon Cooper from The Big Bang Theory. But then I thought some of you might find that offensive. So I reached out to my network and said, well, who else has a lot of information that they need to get across? And they're very smart, and they're dying to share it with everyone. And they said, well, everyone from the West Wing, or Hermione Granger from Harry Potter. Pick your character, folks. This is what you're like. Got a lot of information, you're smart, you need to get it across, but we need to focus it for its intended audience. Now, one of the things that I think will help you in the work you do, whatever role you have, is read State Legislatures magazine. How many of you read this regularly? Be honest. Okay? I hope if I come back in like a month and get to work with all of you, or next year, 100% of the hands in the room go up. I have found this magazine so helpful but what I really like when I read the What Staff Know feature, which by the way is dedicated to the often misunderstood role of staffers, which I love. But I found a lot of gems in here that help me understand communication on the part of staff, and this is why I'm suggesting that you dig into this column, because there's gems in there that really help me understand how various folks in your work communicate, and will help you too. And I love some of these quotes I pulled out from various issues. Bells and whistles cannot make up for quality or substance. Research staff know how to separate the good information from the rest. That's key. And I'm going to encourage you to do the same thing. If you are presenting some information, understand how to separate the good from the rest. What does your audience need to know? And I also love the top quote, reading up on policy is easier than reading minds. Lots of times, the people we are communicating to in a work environment are expecting us to be mind readers and vice versa. So understand that when it comes to communication, the onus is on both parties. You can't just make yourself or expect the other person to make themselves an excellent communicator. You need to communicate what will work for you. If you have limited time, say so. If you just need data, say so. If you prefer to receive information one way versus another, let your staffers, your colleagues know this. Because communication is a two-way street. And I love this quote too from Yeats. Think like a wise man, but communicate in the language of the people. And I want to clarify what I mean by language of the people. This does not mean necessarily changing your language or dumbing it down. What this means is understand how your intended recipient or recipients choose to communicate, and then flex what you're doing or saying to match that. Okay, I'm going to talk you through some of this. Those of you at tables, there are some handouts that are referencing what I'm about to talk through. Feel free to make some notes on those handouts. What I want to share with you is a system called the DISC Dimensions of Communication. Has anyone here ever heard of DISC, or has anyone here ever taken a communication assessment? Yeah, this is very common. If you've taken other assessments or studied other systems, they use different letters, different names. They all mean the same thing. I like DISC because it's very easy to understand. What DISC says is that there are 4 main styles of communication. We are all a mix of all 4. But we tend to rely heavily on 1 or 2 in different situations. And I find learning communication styles is fascinating because once we understand the communication styles and how we tend to communicate, not only can we flex in the moment, we can customize our message to the recipient, but also it's cool to note that we communicate very differently at home than we do at work. You might be one way at home, different at work, different yet when you're out with your friends. So I'm going to share these with you. Feel free to make some notes. And as I talk through and give this brief overview of the DISC communication styles, notice as I explain these, which ones sound like you? Which ones sound like people you work with? Can you identify qualities in other people? Okay? There are 4 quadrants, 4 main communication styles: dominant, influencer, steadfast, and conscientious. I'm going to talk about each one of these. And again, just notice what you notice. Okay, the first letter, the D. D stands for the dominant or dominance communicator. The D communicator tends to be a quick thinker, quick decision maker. They don't like fluff, they don't want details, and they want you to get to the point. And my favorite way to think of how to communicate with a D is, what does this mean for fill in the blank? When I'm working with corporate clients, it's usually something like, what does this mean for my department? What does it mean for the bottom line? What does this mean for this quarter? For your work environment, depending on who you're talking to, it might mean, what does this mean for my committee? What does this mean for me? What does this mean for my constituents? What does this mean for my district? There might be money associated with it. If you come into work Monday morning and say, hi, how was the weekend? To a D communicator, they're going to say, fine, and blow past you. They don't want to hear what your kid did at soccer on Sunday. They don't want to talk about what their kid did at soccer on Sunday. We're here to work. We need to get stuff done. Get to the point. Now, the next style is the I influencer communicator. The influencer is very sensitive to feelings of their own and others. They tend to be social. They like to engage and be engaged. They tend to be the party planners in the office, or when someone's leaving or retiring, they're the person who gets the card and has everyone in the office sign it. They care about people, they care about feelings, and the I communicator, if the D comes into work on Monday and the I says, "Hi, how was the weekend?" and the D goes, "Fine," and blows past that person, the I communicator might feel a little offended. Why didn't he ask me how my weekend was? When the I comes into work on Monday, the I wants to hear how your weekend went. And what did your kid do at soccer on Sunday? And she wants to hear, or he wants to hear. But they also want to tell you what their kid did at soccer on Sunday, and they will tell you. Quick comment here.
Is it possible to be both?
Is it possible to be both? Yes. Again, we are all a mix of all four, but we tend to lean more heavily on one or two of these. And by the way, if you would like to find out where your communication lies, if you Google free disc assessment, DISC, there's a ton of these on the internet. You can also take the paid assessment, which is a lot more complex. Sometimes certain offices will do this for their whole team. So I'll pick it up from here. Okay, the third letter we have, the S, is S for steadfast, the steadfast communicator. The steadfast communicator is thoughtful. They like to think. They like to take in information and digest it for a minute, or maybe an hour, or maybe a day. I heard some groans up here. Someone's not liking that. The S communicator is thoughtful. They like to explore options and make sure everything will be accurate, okay? For instance, if you're on a trip with an S communicator, they will not only check the Google Maps on their iPhone, they will have the paper map that they got at the hotel check-in desk to make sure that the restaurant is over there and we are going the right way. Okay, I'm going to rat out my poor husband here. My husband is the epitome of the S communicator. And yes, he does that map thing. My favorite was when we were in New York meeting a friend of his for dinner. We come out of the subway, and the restaurant was called Rocco's or something like that. And I'm looking right at the restaurant. I said, "Kevin, the restaurant's right there." And he said, no, hang on. And he got his Google Maps out. I said, "But the restaurant's right there. Raphael said we're going right there." No, let me check. He checked his iPhone. By the way, he might be watching this, so I might be in trouble later. Okay, relationships are important to the S communicator. They like to make sure that the relationship is intact even if there is conflict. And then finally, we have the C communicator. I call these the math and science majors, the data junkies. If you watch Veep, Kent Davison, the guy who quotes statistics for everything, is a C communicator. The C communicator loves facts and figures, loves data, sees everything through terms of data, and likes to solve problems through the use of data. If you need some work done or need some numbers crunched and you give, let's say, 10 figures to the C communicator, he will want 20 because he wants to explore all options and see if there's a better, cheaper, faster way to do it. They do need time to process, but they also like details, even when the details aren't needed. Okay? C communicator, I gave the example of a couple coming in at work on Monday. If you ask a C communicator, "How was your weekend?" and if they have time to talk to you, they will tell you, "Oh, it was great." They won't just say, "Oh, I went to dinner and a movie." They'll say, "I was thinking I hadn't been out in a while. So on Saturday, I called up my cousin to see if she wanted to go see Girls Trip. And it turns out she did, and she has to drive from Chicago." You get where I'm going with this. I don't need to tell you the whole thing, right? What's funny is when I have C communicators in my office, they go, "What? No, tell me the rest of the story." Okay, so as I went through these, were you able to identify qualities that you have? Yes? Yeah? Were you able to identify qualities in other people that you need to get information to? Yes. Okay. So what's the benefit of understanding this all around, how we prefer to communicate, how others tend to communicate? Well, that means when I'm presenting information to someone who's maybe a C communicator and I'm an I communicator, I probably want to cut the chit-chat, but maybe I'll focus on the data. So we can flex in the moment and flex what we do so our communication lands with its intended recipient. Yes? Let's keep building on this. And it's not just enough to think, oh, Kent wants data, so I'll give him data, or oh, Sue likes to chit-chat, so I'll talk to her about her kid's soccer game before we get going. Because again, you might not have that time, right? You're in a very busy, busy, busy environment. Go, go, go. And here's the key. And this is something you have to do and you have to practice at. This takes intention, is preparing what you are going to say. A lot of the work I do is as a public speaking coach, and this is where I see people fall down the most, is where they think they don't need to prepare, so they don't prepare. Even if you're the expert, even if you've been doing this for 5, 10, 20, 30 years, just because you know something very well does not mean you're prepared, does not necessarily mean you'll deliver a concise, strong message. Okay? Even if you know your topic inside and out, always prepare. Key thing to note, you should never confuse knowledge with preparation. And I'm going to talk about what that preparation looks like. I'm going to give you the ideal scenario, and then I'm going to give you what is probably your real world scenario. So, how do you get your message to be a little more concise, compact? How do you trim it down when you only have 30 seconds? 3 steps. First is what we started talking about. I want you to be aware of your strengths and your blind spots. Like the examples I gave, like Sheldon Cooper, like Hermione Granger, you probably have a lot of information. Is your tendency that you try to cram everything in when you're giving information to someone? Do you tend to do a data dump? Or do you maybe cut some things back, but maybe you're not giving the most important things? Or do you give the most important things, but maybe you forget to give your listener the supplemental information in a way that they can have it more easily for them? Maybe they want it on email. Maybe they want a handout. Okay? And folks, this goes for everyone. Legislators, staffers, lobbyists, everybody. When we know what our blind spots tend to be, we can overcome them. The second step is to think about who is receiving this message. Consider your audience. And that's using those DISC, dimensions of communication. Now, for what I do, I get to meet a large group of people on a regular basis. I can't possibly make my speech just for D communicators or just for I. In a situation like this, we want to mix it up. Notice we've got things like pipe cleaners and handouts and visuals. But when you know that you need to communicate, let's say I need to provide some information to a legislator, I know that that person's pressed for time, I'm probably going to think about how they prefer to receive information, their communication style, and then think about how I might flex my message so it lands better with the senator versus me just doing a data dump. Okay, third step, prepare and then look for ways to simplify. Here's what I would like your preparation to look like. Here's the ideal, perfect world scenario. Write out what you want to say. And I want to be clear on this. I am not saying do a script. There is no script. You should never give yourself a script, even if you're doing a presentation such as this one. When you create a script, you kind of lock yourself in. But just think about what are your key points? What are your bullet points? What are the most important things you want to get across? Okay? Second, think of your audience. What's their communication style? How do you think they will best receive this information? And then third, and this is also where I see people fall down, ask, what do I want to say? And then, probably the most important question, what does she need to know? In the presentation work I do, this is where I see a lot of presentations fall apart, because the speaker gets on stage and says whatever they feel like saying versus thinking about what will be useful to my audience. What does she need to know? What do they need to know? Raise your hand if you've ever gone to any kind of presentation, work or otherwise. Could be a Tupperware party. Do you know what I'm going to say? And no, go in there. Raise your hand if you've ever been to any kind of presentation and the speaker just blathered on. You were lost, you're going, well, why am I wasting my time here? Yeah, most of us have. And that's because the speaker didn't prepare for his or her audience. They didn't focus the message. They didn't think about what do they need to know. There is a gentleman who produces educational videos in Chicago, Fernando Avila, who just on his newsletter posted a story about how he went to a group learning experience to learn about new educational methods. And I don't know how many people were expected at the course, but the instructor got there, saw that there were only 12 people in the room, and decided to abandon everything he had planned. He had videos, he had multimedia presentations, and he had handouts, and he went, oh, there's only 12 people here. He scrapped all the video presentations and just talked about himself for 45 minutes. Now, that's horrible. I mean, that audience was there. Even if you were expecting 20 and 12 showed up, you give them the best you got, and you do what's best for the audience. So ask yourself these questions. A nice focusing question before you present information is, what is important and why? Because that's another place where I see people fall down. When they have data or some kind of information to share, they just kind of lay it out there. And I'll have some examples of this a little later. But you need to say, why this is important. Why is this worth supporting? Why is this worth looking at? Why is this research important? Going back to the preparation, I gave you the ideal scenario. In reality, I know that you tend to be pressed for time a lot, so here's what I would like you to do in reality. This is going to require, again, intention and a mental commitment and some mental steps. I know in a lot of the work you do, communication happens on the fly, as we saw with poor Corey, who I put up here and said, tell me your story in 20 seconds, right? So what you want to do is give yourself that mental image or that mental directive of whichever one of these connects for you. And folks, I want you to think about how you will use this. I'm purposely not giving specific examples because you all have vastly different roles, but how will you use this? Does the what is important and why question work for you? Or what does she need to know? Whatever it is that will help you focus, keep that in your mind, practice this on your feet, and then mentally take the steps that I showed you before. Okay? Require some intention. And you can practice this. It doesn't just have to be at work. You can practice this at home. Maybe you come home at the end of the day and you want to share a story with your partner or your kids or your cat, whoever you live with. Give yourself the intention. Say, well, I'm going to talk about my day, but what is important and why? So practice it at home. Practice it in real time in your work scenario. A good place to start is using whichever question will help you focus best. And folks, by the way, my slides will be available for you on SlideShare after today, but feel free to make notes on which of these questions help you, or maybe it's all three. Who am I speaking to? Do they tend to be a D, I, S, or C communicator? What is important and why? And what does she care about? And we're talking about this in kind of a general sense. This can be for one-on-one communication, but if you're presenting, making a large presentation or speaking at a meeting, same thing. All these questions will apply. And as I said before, we want to think about what does our listener care about instead of what do I feel like saying? Because we've all been to those presentations, right, where someone just babbles on. Now, here's another radical idea, because you never hear people say this about communication. But this is something I actually got from project management. When you are thinking about your message and what you will communicate, plan to leave something out. You can always put it back in later. But I notice, again, this is where a lot of the communication sags, is when we're doing a data dump or we're trying to say everything in that 30 seconds or 3 minutes or 5 minutes or whatever we get. But if you can think about your message, again, I encourage you to write this out, bullet points, notes to yourself. But think about, what am I going to say? What do I need to get across? And what am I not going to say? Who here has done project management before or worked on projects? Quite a few of you. Okay, excellent. If you've ever studied project management, you know that there's a part where you define the project, and that's called the project scope. But part of the project's scope is also saying what I am not going to do in this project. And the reason project managers do that, if they're doing it well, is they want to avoid what's called scope creep, where we just start putting everything into the project. And it takes longer and it costs more. So same thing with your message. What can you leave out? What's maybe a detail this person doesn't need to know, or what's supplemental and I can share with them later? All right. Stacy, do we have the second worksheet?
It's already been handed out.
Oh, it's been handed out. Yay! Second worksheet. It's got words on one side and a grid on the other side.
There probably are not enough.
Okay.
So if you don't have one, you may want to kind of guide people through it. You could do this on a piece of paper, right?
Absolutely,
You
yes.
need a copy of it.
I do, thank you. Okay, so there's a second worksheet. It has some questions on the front. I'll read this to you. If there aren't enough handouts and you don't have a worksheet, I will read these to you so you can make your own notes or just think about this. So we're going to start on the side that has questions on the front. There's one more. All right. And folks, please stay with me. Don't get into talks with your best friend just yet. Promise I'll give you time for that. Here's what I want you to think about. First thing, I want you to think about something you need to communicate. If you don't have something work-related, you can think about something maybe you need to communicate at home or outside of your work setting. But think about a message you want to get across. Write that down. And I'm going to walk us through these questions for the people who don't have worksheets. Your second question, after you've thought about something you need to communicate, think about to whom will you be speaking? And you can write down the person's name, but I'm encouraging you here to think about what is his or her communication style. How do they tend to communicate information? How do they tend to receive it? And by the way, if you're kind of stuck and thinking, well, I don't know how Leslie communicates, here's a clue. We communicate the same way we prefer to receive information. So if someone is really chit-chatty and social, they probably like people who are chit-chatty and social. If they are short and to the point, they probably want you to be short and to the point. So think about how this person communicates. Underneath that, how does this person best receive information? You can use the D, I, S, or C. But I'm sure also in your work world, you have also noticed with people you communicate with, some people are better in person, some people prefer email, some prefer a phone call, some prefer a text, some don't want you to talk to them at all. Okay, a couple people got that joke. But make notes about how they prefer to receive information. I'm going to give you the next two questions at the same time. What is the key takeaway? So this is something I want you to think about. If there is only one thing this person gets from what I said, if there is only one point that she takes away, what is it? Write it down. After that, what is important and why? This might be that same key takeaway, it might be the same bullet point, but why is this important? And the last question to answer, it's worded very lengthy, which is kind of ironic for someone who's telling you how to make a concise message. What I want you to answer here is what can be left out. Remember I said think about what's something you can leave out? What can be left out? What will you not talk about? What will you not take time to get across? What can be left out? I'll give you about another minute to write down some thoughts. And then we're going to build on this. if you have a worksheet, whenever you're done, flip it over to the other side that has an empty grid on it. Those of you who don't have worksheets, if you have a notebook or piece of paper, you can do this even without the grid. And you'll see why in a minute. I want you to think about that same message that you just wrote about, that you just made some notes on. And if you look at the grid, there are 140 squares here. I want you to write that message in 140 characters. And let me give you an example first, okay? Not 140 words. Your sheet looks like this. That means each square gets either a letter, a space, or a piece of punctuation. For my example, I started a sentence or a thought communicating to my husband that I forgot to thaw out the fish, which sounds really weird, but we have this conversation more often than you'd think. Okay, and notice my comma gets its own box, the space gets its own box. Don't worry if a word breaks mid-line, just go on to the next line. But make sure you give spaces, make sure you give punctuation, and think about this, because if you don't have a pencil with an eraser with you, there's no undo. Little hint, I started mine with the name of the person I'm speaking to. That's probably a waste of about 5 spaces right there. So take a minute, take about 2 minutes, and say your message in 140 characters. Fill it out in the grid, or those of you who don't have a worksheet, if someone wants the grid, they can come take mine. I don't need this anymore. You can take my grid and fill out your message in 140 characters. Take about a minute or 2 to do that, and then I want to ask you about this. Worksheet, anyone? Worksheet? There you go. Awesome. I'll bring us back together in about a minute. I want to hear from you. If you finished your tweet, hang on to it. Keep in mind you've got pipe cleaners and Play-Doh on your table. I'm not seeing any pipe cleaner houses. I'm sad. Take about 15 more seconds. And when you finish writing, you can look up here. I want to hear about this exercise from you. First, on the first sheet where you got to write out answers to questions and think about your message. How was that for you? Good, easy, hard? Don't make me do it again. What do you think? It was good. Who said that?
I did.
Yes. Tell me, what was good about it? Why did you like writing that out?
Short and sweet and put me to the point there.
Did it help you focus and get to the point? It did. Excellent. Okay, can you catch?
Can I catch what?
I have a reward for you for answering my question. That was an amazing catch. It was a deflect, but, well, I saw you had a bound wrist there. Thank you. Okay, let's go on to the other. Well, first let me stay with that comment for a minute. Tell me your name, please.
Bernadette.
Bernadette, thank you, Bernadette. Bernadette liked it because thinking about these questions helped her focus the message. Raise your hand if you had the same experience, if it helped you focus. Excellent. Okay, good, good, good. Now let's go to that second part. Somebody tell me how it was writing your message in 140 characters. Someone who's not Bernadette. Bernadette's off the hook already. Right here.
My name is Ahmed from Kentucky, and I like the second half a lot because even though the first page helped me distill it down, I realized how much extraneous information I wanted to give.
Ah.
140 characters.
Okay, I want to repeat that. That is an excellent comment. Ahmed said, from Kentucky, that the first page helped, but he liked the second page better because he realized how much extraneous information he wanted to put in after the first set of questions. Did anyone else have that experience, that with the 140 characters you realize what you're trying to cram in? Anyone else have that? A few of you did? Good. Good. So was that helpful?
Yeah.
Excellent. Catch. All right, and we got some good catchers in here. Anyone else feel good, bad, ugly about this exercise? Right here.
The second one made me feel like Trump.
Did everyone hear that comment? I'm not sure I'm allowed to repeat it. Not that it's a tweet.
It's a tweet.
It is a tweet, yes. And it is kind of funny because Twitter has become this ubiquitous thing that, some people love it, some people hate it. But doing this exercise, because I was asked to do this, what you just did, in a workshop I was in about 2 years ago, and when they said, okay, put this in a tweet, my first reaction was, I don't want to tweet, I don't like Twitter. But you know what? It really does force you to focus. And I try this anytime I need to shorten something. So pick your poison here. You can have these questions. That's probably not a good way to put it, right? Yeah. Pick your support here. Use questions to help you focus your message, or if doing the 140 characters, and you could even play with it, make it 160. Some people like to use this format, but they say up to 200 characters because they allow for things such as titles or credits, things like that. So choose whatever's going to work for you. Yes? Yeah. All right. What questions do you have about this first part before I turn you over to Senator Bill O'Neill so he can talk to you about some storytelling? Right here. And actually, let's get, where's my mic? You have one out here? Oh, there's a mic out here, too. So questions? If you have a question, you want to come up to the mic on the stand? I just saw a hand. Question? There's 2 mics right here. Can you grab one of the mics so the audience can hear you?
I'm Ken Holmland, representative from Montana.
Thank you.
I've always wondered why the younger people used words that were abbreviated, and this kind of gives you an understanding of why they do, because you have to be more brief.
Thank you. Come on up right here.
Hi, Kieran from North Carolina.
Hi, Karen.
We do a lot of repetition when we do presentations, so I was wondering what your stance is on repeating things versus brevity. What's more effective?
Oh, that is a great question. Repetition versus brevity. Okay, here's the thing. Remember I talked about all the challenges we have with communication these days? Adults usually need to hear a message 3 times before it sticks. Adults usually need to hear a message 3 times before it sticks. And adults usually need to hear a message 3 times before it sticks. So I don't think repetition will necessarily harm you. Where I would look is if the repetition is adding time that you simply don't have, or you need to cut it out, you could maybe cut it down to saying that thing once at the beginning, once at the end. So repetition is okay, but be judicious with it. The other thing you can do to, let's say you don't have time for that repetition, say the thing once and then make sure your audience got it. Make sure they either talk back to you or there's some kind of assessment. Thank you. Gentleman up front here had a question.
My name is Representative Pittman from Kansas.
Hi.
When I approach this, I'm thinking about how we address audiences.
Yes.
Mixed bag of individuals who have different communication styles.
Yes.
This is a very focused exercise on maybe one individual. How would you approach an audience like this, where we have a whole series of different folks, as we think about how they might want to receive information? Or is that even relevant too?
No, absolutely, it is relevant. So as I mentioned, when you do have a mixed bag, when you have a room full of people like this, almost never will it be all D communicators or all I communicators. If that is the case, you'll know going in. So for example, group of clients I worked with over years, it was an engineering firm, and the only people I ever worked with were engineers. So I knew that they were going to be a little more data-driven, they'd want to get to the point, a lot of fluffy stories about what I learned in training probably wasn't the way to go. But that's rarely the case. When you have a larger audience, you want to mix it up. So there might be something engaging, such as a video or pictures, as you saw that I had. You might have some data and some statistics, maybe some charts that will satisfy the S and the C communicators. But also, putting your most important points up at the top will help get to the D communicators. Does that help? Excellent. We can take maybe, go ahead.
Where's my little treat?
Oh, yes. I have to find, here, can you catch? By the way, okay, those of you who ask questions, you get candy too, so make sure you come see me. I can take about one more question before I turn this over to Senator Bill O'Neill. Do we have one more question? Oh, yes, hello, come on up to the mic. Sorry, there's lights, so it's sometimes hard to see out here.
I like the idea of tailoring your communication style to the DISC, but I'm wondering if there's any research. I mean, a concern that popped into mind was that you might come across as inauthentic if people know you to be more of one of the four, and I was wondering if there's any research about that or if you could talk about that.
Thank you for that segue, because part of what Senator Bill O'Neill is going to talk to you about is about being authentic. So let me just give you a couple more points before I segue onto our talk with Senator Bill O'Neill. We talked about making our message short, but how do you make sure that it lands with your audience, okay? One of the ways, again, thank you for that awesome question, is to avoid using canned speeches. And you want to see how bad my jokes are, look at my slide. I put this graphic up of canned peaches so I could remind myself to tell you to not give canned speeches. Please groan. Okay? If your talk is canned, if it's rehearsed, and you say the same thing each time you go out and give a talk to constituents, committees, local groups, your audience will know if it's stale and rehearsed, okay? Two good examples of this. I've been told from NCSL folks that lots of you don't watch the show Veep because it hits a little too close to home. Which, believe me, I probably wouldn't either. But if you watch Veep, there are two great examples of people who always say the same thing. Joe Thornhill, former minor league baseball manager who decided to run for president, no matter what he got asked, would always talk about baseball. Okay? Danny Chung, no matter what he got asked, even if it was about children or education, he would talk about what it was like to be in the military, which I have great respect for. Every man in my family was a vet. However, they always said the same thing, and they never gave an authentic speech. Okay? So you want to keep it fresh, and there's a couple of ways you can do that. Using your stories, whether it's something about your district, something local, something you've experienced, or data. Okay? Lots of times data that illustrates a point will resonate. Some of you, and Senator O'Neill will talk to you about this, some of you might not like to get personal or share personal stories. That's fine, okay? Then find something related to the work you do to talk about. In the current issue of The New Yorker, there's an article about Bernie Sanders, and one of the things they touch on that really resonated with me is that Sanders is not a natural storyteller, and if you watch him talk, he doesn't really tell stories, but what he does do is he uses data to dramatic effect. And if you know his story, it makes sense. He grew up in Brooklyn. The first town he represented and came from in Vermont was a town of 200 people. If you're talking to a small town of 200 people, telling your stories about growing up in Brooklyn simply isn't going to land, right? Okay, so share something that will make sense, that will land, and be authentic. I'm going to let your colleague talk to you about that, but I want to make a distinction here. When we tell people things like share your stories or be authentic, for some reason it sounds like we're saying share your deep, dark secrets. Not at all. Just sharing something that is real and authentic, okay, such as successes. That will resonate with your audience. So what I'd like to do now is turn it over to your colleague, Senator Bill O'Neill. Those of you who ask questions, come see me. I have candy for you. And I'll be back momentarily. Thank you so much.
The clicker.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Okay.
Oh, let me exit.
Okay. Well, thank you all for coming today. This is really a great energy this morning, and just really, I'm really impressed and honored to be here. In the way of an introduction, basically, you know, storytelling to me is messaging. And what I'm going to be talking a lot about is messaging. And all I can do is offer my own experience, very subjective. You know, what works for others might not work for me. But I want to just share my story, my political story, in the context of messaging. And so I can say just in a brief bio, I was elected in 2009. My first 2 terms, I represented a swing Republican district. I'm a Democrat. And now I represent an overwhelmingly Democratic Senate seat. So, and it has affected my messaging as far as who I talk to and so forth. But I want to start with what we are up against as elected officials. All right, stereotypes, okay? I had no idea when I was elected in 2009 what kind of ridiculed group I was signing up for. Politicians, my own brothers, you know, you're a politician. Just all of the stereotypes that were pushovers, we're just waiting for the lobbyist handout, etc. This is what we're up against. And I was honestly stunned. I mean, I just always had tremendous respect for legislators. I was an advocate, a nonprofit advocate before I became a politician. And I remember going to an NCSL smaller conference sponsored by the Kettering Foundation, and they came up with these statistics, like 60% of our voters think that we state legislators have personal drivers. You know, so I mean, that's just one example. So this is what we're up against as far as telling our story in an authentic way and kind of like really getting to the meat of who we are. So, whoops. Yes, so I just have to include this just as, you know, rites of passage. Many of you know what it's like to go to the mailbox when your opponent or an IE is sending out stuff. So let me talk about this messaging. This was 2010. Okay, so I go to the mailbox, and there I am in a mugshot, and it has to do with I got these tickets like for not wearing a seatbelt and not having insurance. I paid it, but some of us need warrants to kind of remind us that we need to pay. But and I'll never forget, you know, like going to mass that Sunday, and everybody's looking at me, and the priest is going, I had no idea, but everybody was teasing me. And here's what it is. Happily, because my district knew me, I do a lot of door-to-door in New Mexico. That's a real tradition. Our districts are small enough. I'm a senator, but I have 50,000 people in my district. So the fact that people knew me meant that this was ridiculous, mostly. And in fact, I would say it even backfired. Some of the Republicans in my district were offended by this whole notion that I was a secret criminal, right? And so, but that's a good case scenario. The thing is, the irony is, they had me, man. They had me on a vote. Like in New Mexico, we had a very controversial food tax measure, and for the team, I voted for the food tax. Oh my God! And I know. So the governor assured us he'd have his, you know, I don't even want to go there. Governor Richardson, I bless his heart, but anyway, they had me. They had me on the food tax. I mean, I had people calling me up, I want to vote for you, but you voted for a food tax, please. Why did you vote for? But they went down this rabbit hole of turning me into like a secret criminal. And so I benefited. That election I won by 163 votes, 5,000 on each side. So it was, you know, these things matter. They kind of accumulate, these little nuances. So anyway, okay. So I want to just talk about, you know, this is about successful communication. Obviously, winning, you know, many of us wouldn't be here if we didn't win. I mean, winning is everything in politics. On the other hand, I would suggest to you to think about, in a larger sense, what is successful messaging? I mean, who are we? Who are we as legislative, you know, candidates or as state officials? You know, can we risk who we really are? And that's a real question. You know, I mean, I'm not saying like confessional, believe me, that your opponents will take care of that. They're doing their opposition research right now. But in terms of who are we? And then I think it gets into if you're feeling a little uneasy about sharing stuff, then maybe that's the right track. But I'm not remotely advocating just like confessional Sylvia Plath kind of stuff. All right, so let me go back here. All right, so I'm going to use this. This was 2004. I ran and I didn't win. And actually, my campaign people did a really good job. But I was new, and it was pretty intimidating. I was paying a lot of money to these folks. But that first sentence, which I probably need my glasses, yes. Both of my grandparents were immigrants. My grandfather worked as a chauffeur and my grandmother as a maid to create a better future for their kids and people. Their example taught me, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, I never knew my grandparents, ever, on that side of the family. All right? Yes, my dad was an Irish, he was poor growing up. And sadly, my grandparents on his side had died by the time I came into this world. On the other hand, is it? I'm trying to fix it. Okay. It's working out great, too. Okay. On the other hand, my mother, she was a debutante. Her father, my grandfather on that side, was a classmate of Franklin Roosevelt at Harvard. I mean, I was born into an affluent Irish Catholic family, okay? This is not who I am. No, I didn't lose this election because of this, but it was all about that's who my consultants wanted me to be. And at the time, I didn't have the gumption to say, that's not who I am, excuse me. But I bring this up because, I just feel bad. That was a misrepresentation of who I am to my voters. So I just use that as an example of, for me, the wrong kind of messaging. Okay, now this is funny because the slide should say more like it, but it says more of the same. So that's very interesting. But I'm doing this because this is more who I am. Fast forward 2016. So disregard, it's meant to be more like it rather than the 2004 mailing. So, I use this mailing because it is crime related. And if you're going to put a mailing out, crime, it's divisive, it gets people nervous. My real world experience is in that area. I've worked with adult men and parolees coming out of prison and more recently juveniles. And, I tend to be, I'm very interested in criminal justice reform and all those kind of things. But it made me a little nervous because it's crime. I was in a pretty good situation with my opponent. He never did do anything against me. So, we were waiting for his mailing, but it was kind of risky for me. And what was really risky was, you'll note the football in my hand. All right. Okay. So that is to reference, I was second in the Ivy League in kickoff returns my senior year at Cornell, okay? So I have this bio. So exactly, like, why kind of minimize all this? Like, it kind of trivializes the importance of crime. But it does get at the fact, I have to say, yes, I was second in the Ivy League in kickoff return average, but we were terrible. We were a horrible team. So I had many, many kick returns. I was also a punt returner, but rarely had an opportunity in that way. So it was just a way of working my story in. And so anyway, but I survived this mailing. Okay, no, I want to emphasize, this is totally subjective. No, maybe this works for people, but I get really irritated with all these email solicitations, and I just use this as an example, and again, not to ridicule this particular one, but here we have, oh my God, my husband is so great, and then our kids go, Daddy, does that mean our friends can stop moving away now, And then at the end, can you send us $5? $5? You're going to do that for $5? I mean, it's just, to me, it's false. It's like sentimental. It's like, give me a break, okay? But on the other hand, I could be totally wrong. And again, I respect anybody who's doing this. You know, messaging is, you just do what you can. But I am always suspicious of the consultant. There seems to be, in our state at least, like this tradition of these irritating emails. Okay, so this is an example of what does work, in my opinion, from my Republican friends. This is a mailing done by the current Republican House representative who has now my seat. And I was working really hard against her. Boy, just really working hard against her. And then I got this in the mailbox, and I thought, this race is toast. This woman is winning this race. No, it's not the most risky mailing. I mean, you've got Holy Communion, you've got horses, etc. But it really like gives you a sense of who she is. It's not message driven, it's not poll driven. I mean, it's very self-serving, but it is. I thought it was great. So that's, in my opinion, what works. And then this, later on, I'll just talk about the importance of contact. You know, this is what I do. I do email newsletters, but I don't ask for $5, all right? I would ask for a lot more. But it's basically, I'm talking to my constituents, and I'll talk about the importance of contact. And I'm looking at this, and yeah, there's no way you can get around not being self-serving. I mean, I'm talking about, oh yeah, I did all this, and I stood up to the governor. But I do try to be personal in these correspondence, and I feel that's a strength that I have. I feel like with my communication with my district. Okay, so 3 suggested takeaways for today. No matter what your message is, contact, repeated. I mean, we've been, Mariana was talking about that, just repeating it, but in different ways. Again, in New Mexico, we have this great tradition of door-to-door, but email newsletters. I do a constituent survey before each session, and I get quite a response from my district, and it's wonderful because I always have spaces. What I do is I try to anticipate the issues that we're going to talk about during the session. I mean, what's on people's minds, and I always leave room for comments. And of course, we want those email addresses, and I've been really, it's been very successful on that level. People will put their email address, and it's yes or no, and I try to be objective in the questions. It's hard. I should have had a sample, but I get criticized. I mean, sometimes of its constituents say, "Well, your question is so biased." So I try to be, increasingly trying to be objective. And sincerity. Okay, please. Oh wait, I'm sorry. Mid-session franking letter in New Mexico, we'd have that. It's just good. Any kind of contact, repeated contact. That's why I was able to win in 2010. Many people thought, because of my food tax vote, that I was toast, but other reasons. But just a repeated contact, especially if you're new, that's just key. And then sincerity. Okay, no matter how you vote, your constituents want to know what you believe. And yes, it's hard to be punished for unpopular votes, but you just needed to vote the way that you feel. I mean, you are elected to represent your district, to use your judgment, not to just to read the polls and so forth. So I think I think there's a deep longing on the part of our constituents for authenticity, as Mariana mentioned. And then finally, just define yourself before your opponent does, who you are, who you're not. I still am trying to figure out what my brand is. I just try, I guess I'm progressive, but I'm really practical. I really want to work across the aisle and so forth. And people that know me know that I grew up, and my poor dad, he was just never accepted the fact that I was a Democrat. And, bless his heart. But I have a real strong bipartisan instinct. So I just not big on ideological purity. I just think we need to work together. Okay, to that point. This is Edmund Burke. Your representative owes you not his industry only, his or her, but his or her judgment, and he or she betrays instead of serving you if he sacrifices it to your opinion. Now, we'll forget the fact that I think he lost his next election in Ireland, but we'll just ignore that. But I mean, truly, I strongly believe we are elected to use our judgment, and that's that just keeps coming back for me. It's just important for me, and so I just love that quote. And so next, we're gonna in the spirit of taking difficult votes and telling your story. This is a poem called Kayak, which is in my book, which is on Amazon, by the way. And I do have copies here, by the way. But so this is the context for this is there's a young legislator in our chamber who votes fearlessly, and he's an inspiration to me personally. And because of this, we've kind of developed this verb in New Mexico. If you're going to go kayak, are you going to go kayak on this vote? Meaning, for me, it'd be, are you going to go against the trial lawyers or the unions? And, you're going to go kayak? So it's become this sort of fun image. So this is called kayak. Okay? So, tipsy in the cross current of the deep river of partisan belief that will drown a sane person. Fury to be unleashed on the texting machines and otherwise. Here it comes, my moment of dissent. Eyebrows raised, averted glances, waiting for the barrage of incredulous electronic messages. How could you? Do you not understand? The unions are threatening action if you opt for that kayak again. The creation story of our rationality. But my district wants to be surprised, I protest. They grow weary of having their own views just reflected back to them. It's a coward's mirror. In that moment of bravery, floating in decision and unruly choices, no reasonable tones of a father. Grinning, he comes to our back row. Speaking of kayak, he is willing to stare down our active believers and wants only to be liberated from the uniformity of partisan belief. I'm feeling the kayak today. Isaac begins with his mischievous young man's grin. Indeed I am. Dude, we counsel from our maturity. Wasn't yesterday enough? He is smiling, unconvinced. They will punish you. They will question your very being. I don't care. Isaac shrugs. Primary me. Okay. So, as for this legislator, I cannot pretend to be stupid yet again today. Watch this freak vote. So that's my kayak poem. Okay. All right. And many of you know what that's like, I'm sure. So just in closing, and I can take maybe a couple questions, and then we'll get back to Mariana here. I'm very idealistic. We can do so much better politically, and it needs to start with us. This is about what we can be. I mean, we talk all the time, at least in my chamber, amongst ourselves, R's and D's. We gotta do this better. We gotta work together. And so I just feel it's important, and it's not gonna start with Congress. It's not gonna come from Congress. It's not gonna come from our constituents who are sadly divided, partisan, or at least what I hear on my emails and so forth. It tends to be very partisan. But I do believe that we need to risk the kayak. We need to work together, and it's just, otherwise nothing will change. So, and we can talk about it, and and it's hard. It's very hard. I know the votes that I'm looking at next session that I want to take, and I just have to remind myself, I just don't like getting beat up and with the emails and all of that. But it really is. That's why what we do is so challenging. But I would say state legislators are the key to our salvation as a democracy. So that's my presentation, and I can take a couple questions if that is appropriate. So my book is 1895. No, but it's pretty exciting. I had my reading, my opening Sunday. So, okay, thanks. Do you want to go to and identify yourself?
I'm a state legislator from Massachusetts, Betty Poirier. I'm interested to know, how is your state divided, Democrat, Republican, and how large is your district as a senator?
My district is 50,000 people. Our House district is 25. And then right now we have a Democratic legislature by a hair in the House. Actually, 2 years ago, it was a Republican House. We've been traditionally a Senate, Democratic Senate since the 50s. We're sort of a purple state sometimes, or it's been a while, but we have a Republican governor, and we've had a tradition of Republican governors. But historically, New Mexico's pretty Democratic, but everything is pretty fluid right now. So that's where we are.
It's an interesting story.
Oh.
Your story is very interesting.
Well, thank you. Okay. All right. Yes. And
I'm Mugoya Augusta. I'm a member of parliament from the Republic of Uganda, the Pearl of Africa. A lawyer by profession and an advocate who is currently also practicing international economic law. So I'm doing two things at the same time, representing my people and at the same time practicing commercial law in the Commonwealth jurisdictions. I have a simple question for you, because it appears partially we share the same experience in the political arena. What nature and kind of demands do you get from your voters? And I've also heard that you have a population of about how many voters in your district?
How many what?
Voters.
50,000.
50,000. In my constituency, I have 120,000 voters, a constituency. And a constituency, for example, in my district, Bugiri, I have about 3 constituents. So you can compare and contrast, but I wanted to know the nature of demands you get from your voters.
I think, thanks for the question, and we know that one. And it's basically, I think, honestly, and I believe this to my core, my voters want me to be real. They want me to be authentic. They trust my judgment, and they're not going to agree with me all the time, and that's the challenge. When you vote in a certain way where people are angry with you, they walked for you, they had your yard sign in their yard, and they let you know that. But I think at the end of the day, they understand that we're there to do the right thing for the larger whole. So I think people want a better political system now, and it's time for us to really make that happen. Okay. All right, do I get a chocolate? Thanks. All right.
It can get handed out now. Hang on, coming back. Good job. All right, thank you, Senator. Get back over to my slides, and we'll continue here. Yes, in case Senator O'Neill did not mention it, he does have his book of poetry, The Freedom of the Ignored, for sale. You can see him up here at the front. And, oh, let's go back to mine. Let me just fast forward here. Thanks for sticking with us. Okay, so we've heard about planning your message, thinking about your audience, making it clear, concise, to the point, and then being authentic and sharing a little bit more of yourself. So we're going to pick this up in part 3. Again, bear with me while I catch up to my place. This is a good, very quick fast-forward review for you. Did your tweets? All right. You heard my bad jokes about canned peaches? You've got something to share today. All right. Let's pick it up where we left off, and building on this, for those of you who either make presentations, will make presentations, or use some kind of handout or printed material, I want to give you some ideas for making your visuals effective. Raise your hand if you have ever received either a handout or you watched a presentation that was like a novel. And you're looking, and it's word soup. Why are you making me read this? Yeah. So don't do that to your recipients. We want to make sure not just that our message lands with its intended recipient, but if you are using a visual aid, and I highly recommend that you do, there are visual learners, there are auditory learners, there are tactile learners. We're going to hear about that in a moment. But it's important to understand why looks matter. And I'm sure all of us intrinsically know this on some level, but when you look at what's out there, even just at some websites, it's amazing how few people take the time to make sure that their visuals are effective in landing with their audience. So why should your visuals look good? Well, here's why. What your audience sees is your first impression. We all know the cliche, you never get a second chance to make a first impression. But can you think of a time when you either saw a menu at a restaurant that was really just either yucky or it just looked bad and you thought, well, I don't want to eat here? Or if you've ever gone to a website that is severely outdated? I have some examples to show you. Okay, that's the first impression. And as we mentioned before, with the way everything has become in our work world, everyone's attention is at a premium these days, right? We've got work, we've got phone, we've got email, we've got iPhones, we've got games to play on those iPhones, we've got Twitter, we've got Instagram. Everyone's attention is at a premium. So if your stuff looks bad, guess what? You lost them, and you might also lose that opportunity to make your point, especially if your visuals are help driving home the point, providing some supporting data, or something that you want to make sure your audience gets. So you might lose that opportunity. Okay? Here is one of my favorite examples. What am I referencing here? Breaking Bad, yes. Chocolate for the gentleman in the back. Coming off of a speech from the senator from New Mexico. Those of you who watched Breaking Bad, or those of you who didn't, there was a character on the show, the son, who was concerned about his dad. His dad was dying with lung cancer, so the son set up a Save Walter White website where, on the show, people could donate money to help raise money for Walter White's medical costs. This was the website. By the way, if you go there, savewalterwhite.com, this is what you will see. It is one of the ugliest websites I've ever seen. This is what websites looked like in 1997. They had those ugly templates with sparkles and colors. There's yellow text, then it switches to white text. The font changes throughout, and the photos are pretty blurry. Would you want to stay on that website very long? Forgetting it's Breaking Bad, would you, if you didn't know this was a Breaking Bad website, would you want to visit this site for very long? No. A lot of you in the front are shaking your heads, and I agree with you. Okay? Ugly, ugly website. Here is another reason why what our listeners see matters. I asked before who reads the state legislature's magazine online, who listens to Our American States, the NCSL podcast. Come on. Okay, if I come back in a year, I want all those hands going up. If you're not listening to it, I highly recommend you do. I invite you to listen to it. It's very short, it's very informative. If there's only one you check out, those of you who didn't raise your hands. No, there were like 5 of you that raised your hands. If there's one you check out, I highly recommend you listen to episode 12 from June 22nd. Stacy Householder is on this episode talking about how the brain works and how that applies to our work. But what I really took away from this podcast, something she points out that is stunning, is that our brains rely 60% on visuals for information. And because our brains are over-reliant on what we see, that is why we need to endeavor to make sure our visuals land with the audience, that they look good and are effective, okay? Something that really drove home the point for me, and when I heard that statistic, I kind of went, oh yeah. Did you ever do this? You go to a concert to hear a band you like, and then as soon as someone sits in front of you or has a big head, you go like this, because you got to see the musicians. And I always wondered about that. I always wondered, if I'm coming to hear the band, why do I always have to see the band? It's because our brains take in information by over-relying on our sight. So let me give you some guidelines. Folks, I'm going to start with, thank you for closing the doors in the back. We're getting some hall noise. I'm going to start with guidelines that mostly pertain to big visuals like PowerPoint, and then I will talk about printed, but some of these guidelines can flip-flop for both, okay? If you are making slides, if you use PowerPoint or Prezi, one idea per slide. We don't do the data dump, okay? You can always have more slides. There's no formula that 5 slides equals 2 minutes or anything like that. You can always use more slides. What I like to encourage people to do for slides is follow the 3x3 rule. Now, this is a bit constrictive, but it is just a guideline. What 3x3 means is 3 bullet points down, no more than 3 words of text across. Very limiting, probably not realistic, but here's the takeaway from that. Don't write a novel. Have you ever seen slides that are just the person's entire text and then they read it to you? Don't do that. Here's something else I want you to remember. The audience or your listener always has a secret question in her mind or his mind. That question is always, WIFM, what's in it for me? Translation, your visuals need to be relevant and need to have something for the audience. What's in it for me? Throughout your visuals, I encourage you to be consistent. Consistency is key. No more than 2, maybe 3 fonts. I'm going to talk about fonts in a moment. Keep the same colors. If you're doing something for NCSL, you've seen the color scheme on the website. Don't go crazy with the colors. And keep, if you use logos, keep it consistent throughout. Consistency is key. The content, as I mentioned, this kind of ties into the WIFM, the what's in it for me. The content must be relevant to your audience, but also what you are talking about or what information you're supplying. So make sure that it relates, that it's not some random thing. If you are providing some kind of supplemental material or a leave behind, let them know that. I'm not going to talk about this today, but I want you to see this chart. You can take this home and look at it later. But if you throw up something that you give no mention to or the audience doesn't see how it's relevant, they will be confused. And also, your visuals, this is a good rule for any kind of visual you create, must have negative space. Negative space is any part that doesn't have text or an image on it. So all the whiteness you see around my text at the top, text at the bottom, that's negative space. Negative space is important, needs to be there because it is easier for the eyes to read and the brain to take in. When there's stuff crammed on a slide, harder to read. Simple. Okay, let me touch on fonts. I mentioned I would mention these. What you are looking at here in this first line of text, this is a sans serif font. It means it has clean edges. For large projected images, such as a presentation, I recommend sans serif fonts. They are easier to be read at a distance. If you don't believe me, look at billboards, and there are a lot of bad billboards. The best ones have clean edges on the fonts. The ones that put script or like the curly Q fonts, you can't read them. Oh no, this didn't translate. Shoot. Let me see if this came from a Mac to a PC. So, okay, the second one is supposed to have serifs on it. Guess who didn't fix that today? Sorry for that. This is a serif font. You know what? I want to show you this. I'm going to see if I can type one really quick and pull it up. Apologies. Oh, and of course it goes back to Bill's thing. Nope, I got it. Let me see if I can pull this up and give you something serifed. Feel free to play with those pipe cleaners while I'm fixing this. Pipe cleaners. I haven't seen any Play-Doh sculptures yet. I have? Oh, you've got one going. Awesome. Awesome. Okay, I got it going. That's a little tiny, but if you can see, I wanted to make the point here where it says this is a serif font. Serifs are those little feet at the end of text. You see these usually on typewriters, that's where they originally came from. But those little feet, it's not great for a projected image, as you can see, but when you are making something printed, 12 point or so, something like a handout, you want the serif font, because what those serifs do, those little feet, they connect one letter to the other, and it is easier for the eyes to read. Books are printed with serif fonts. Okay? So clean edges for projected, serif font for printed materials. And my final one, this is an obnoxious font. Stay away from these at all costs, no matter what you're doing, printed or projected. Hard to read, no one likes it. So now I'd like to show you some bad examples of visuals, and please tell me what you notice is going on here. Okay. First, this is presenting data, and this is what I see most people do. They will be asked to present some data or talk about some numbers, and then what they do is they just throw all the data up there and they say, here is the spending by Illinois candidates. So what? Okay? If you're presenting data, it needs to tell a story, or we need to say what we want the audience to take away from this. By the way, and Bill, Senator, I'll ask you to help me out here. Anyone know where I got those names from on the left of these candidates? I made these up. Who? Not House of Cards. Veep. Who was the first person to say Veep? Back there. Okay, Senator, can you make sure the gentleman, can you stand up, please? Yes. He gets candy. He doesn't play football anymore, folks. He caught it, yes. That's right, he was a catcher. Okay, so yes, candidates, I pulled names from Veep. And notice it's just a data dump. Also notice how tiny my text is here. That's ridiculous. When you're doing PowerPoint, the smallest font you should ever use is 28 point. Anything? 28 point. Yeah, anything less than 28 will be difficult for your audience to read. Okay, so what do we have here? A lot of names, some running for governor, some running for attorney general, how much they raised, how much they spent. But I still don't know what my takeaway is here, and it's horrible looking. Okay? Here's what I was trying to show. Whenever you have data, especially if it's coming from a table or a chart, I'll come back to you in a moment. When you have a data or a chart, you don't just want to dump the information there. You want your audience to know what it is they're supposed to see or take away. And what I was trying to show from this chart, the original one I had, what I wanted to illustrate was that Sue Wilson outspent her competitors, and look at by how much. She spent $23,405. Well, you can see it, right? Because I gave you a big font. But also notice what I did with the title. Instead of giving you a generic spending by Illinois candidates, I told the story in the title. And you want your title to say what's going on here, or say what you're trying to illustrate. In the Illinois gubernatorial race, Sue Wilson spent the most of any candidate. And that's what I'm trying to show here. She spent over $23 million. And notice I also made her line bold, because she is the takeaway. I didn't need to show who was running for Attorney General because I didn't want you to take away or know anything about the Attorney General. We were focusing on the governor's race, and that was it. And Sue Wilson outspent her candidates. Okay, another bad example. This is what I mean by putting a novel on your slides. And remember a moment ago I said that consistency is key? Look at how those bullets are written. Right, it's terrible. On purpose. Oxygen discovered, Helsinki X signed. Then I start with a short date, 8/2/1776. Then I start with just a year, 1850. Then I start with another factoid, okay? The date formats are all over the point. I've written a novel here. It's hard to read, it's clunky, and if I threw this up here, you'd probably sit there reading it instead of listening to me, right? So, someone said, what? Exactly. So there are a couple of ways you could do this. I have a couple of examples for you, and again, this is just an example, but I want you in your work to think about, what do I want this to say? What do I want the audience to take away? What might be the best way to present this? Okay? If I just want to notate what happened in August of various years, I might just do a simple table like this. Okay? What happened in 1774 in August, 1776. And I like to think that, after oxygen was discovered 2 years later, the Declaration of Independence was signed. I like to think they're connected somehow. Maybe, I don't know. Or maybe I just want to show over a range of time, so maybe I'll do a simple timeline rather than doing a data dump. Again, What's your point? What do you want to get across? What's going to matter or make sense to your audience? Okay? Here's another horrible slide. What's wrong with it? Background, yes. The background's too dark. The text is too dark. You can see maybe the title. I'm not a fan of dark slides to begin with, but if you do need to use a dark background, use a very light text, either white or yellow. Those are the two that show up best. Sometimes you don't know who's in your audience, but I do tend to lean heavily on blues because blue is the one color that can be seen by all people, whether they're colorblind or not. Reds, oranges, and greens are a little hard for colorblind audience members to distinguish. So I like to be a little judicious. So yeah, if you're using a dark slide, light text. Okay? Someone I think you should know, if you do ever need to present data, I highly recommend you check out Stephanie Evergreen's website, stephanieevergreen.com. She is a master of data and a master of data visualization. And I agree with what she says. She believes that when we're the ones presenting data, it is on us to present data effectively, because if we're effective in how we present our data, the conversation changes, and she's right. Okay, I'm going to show you some examples from her. But I highly recommend checking out her website, because even just her newsletter, I get so many tips from. Now, this was an actual chart that Stephanie was given to work with a few years ago, and this is exactly how it was presented, all gray and dark. What's wrong with this? What don't you like about this? Did I hear it's pitiful? It is pitiful, yes. And what else? I heard something over here. It is hard to decipher, yes. So this chart, if any of you have ever made a chart or a graph in Microsoft Excel or in PowerPoint, you plug in the data and it looks easy because it automatically churns out something for you with the labels, but this was the default. This is what the program cranked out. And what else I have a problem with here is I don't know what I'm supposed to take away from this. Graduation rates by major, so what? Got some years here, I can't really distinguish the bars, and I can't tell who's dipping down. So it's kind of messed up, and I don't know what I'm supposed to take away, and I bet you don't either. Here's how Stephanie changed it, okay? She made the graph bigger, added color, took away all the labels, and then just used a simple call out to point out what the takeaway was from this graph. And I think it's great, okay? What we were supposed to see is that over a range of years, in 1 year, the theater department had the lowest graduation rate, so what the college was recommending was that either tutoring be offered to these students or recommend that they change their major. So I like that. Yeah, it's okay to laugh, it's fine. I grew up among theater people. We can laugh at their graduation rates. I'm sorry, you know what, was anyone in here a theater major? Yes. Yes, okay. I did theater my whole life, so I'm right there with you. Okay, but you notice how much easier to read, and the call out tells us what we need to take away versus this, where we're left to kind of just figure it out. So always decide what kind of story you're telling, what's the takeaway, what do you want your audience to see? We kind of have to hold their hand and walk them through it because they're not mind readers. Okay? Moving on from presenting large, what if you're giving some printed material? Well, maybe you'll have a handout. Handouts are great, especially when you're presenting, as you saw today, because they're good for visual learners. Visual learners always want something to look at. I think handouts are also good for tactile learners because the tactile learners either need to be playing with pipe cleaners or writing while they learn. It can be a place to take notes, but for people who prefer to listen, a handout, if it's supporting what you say, will also free up their minds, their brains, their eyes, their ears, and they can look at the handout later. You can even instruct them to do that if you want. Handouts are great leave-behinds. It is a static reminder after your talk, after you're gone. It's a good reminder of your takeaways. Or it's a good place that you can also put some supplemental information, something you want them to see later. Maybe something you can't give in the talk. Remember what I said earlier? Decide what you can leave out, or what maybe do I not need to share with this person right now? Put it on a handout. You can put references there, resources. I also recommend that you put your contact information on it. Here are my guidelines for creating your own handouts. Number 1, not a data dump. Do not write a novel on your handouts. Bullet points, maybe charts, graphs, some visuals, photos. Don't write a novel on it, okay? Handouts have to be useful. If it doesn't supplement what you're saying, doesn't support what you're saying, doesn't tie to it, it's not going to be very useful for the person who takes it home. Similar to slides, use a lot of negative space, leave space around the edges, don't cram a ton in there. Okay? And a question to ask yourself before you put a handout together or some supplemental information is, what is the purpose? So the reason I say this is the person who takes that home is going to want to know, okay? So the purpose should be clear. Is it supplemental information to what you said? Is it in support of what you said? Is it a copy of your slides? That'll be pretty obvious. You all got some handouts for this part, so feel free to take notes on those. And again, you can include follow-up resources, but also always have some kind of contact information, whether it's the website for your office, phone number, email, whatever makes sense for you, okay? But at a bare minimum, have your name or the name of your office on it, because how many of you has this happened to, where you get a handout or you get a workbook from some presentation or training you go to, and you get back to your office, look at it 6 months later, and you're going, I wonder what this was from. Yeah, or when was this? When did I do this? So make sure that you've got some good contact information on there. Here, I'd like to pause and hear what you want to ask me about creating visuals or using visuals to support what you say. So similarly, if you have a question, come on up to one of these 2 mics. I'll be happy to answer your questions. I know we have one from earlier, so.
Hi, good morning again. My name is Wakenya Clanton, and my question goes back to the slide that you were doing on the projected images.
Yes.
And I wanted to know whether or not those same tips work for websites as well. I know we were talking about PowerPoints at that particular time, but those are just like general rules of thumb, even when we're designing websites and social media posts and things like that?
That's a great question if it pertains to websites, social media. Here's how I'm going to answer it. Yes, but. Because the way the challenge with websites and things like social media, especially in this type of work, is that they tend to be more marketing tools. So there's a whole different set of rules that apply. They're not entirely different, because you do still want it to be effective visually and have good information on it. But for instance, I would recommend that you talk to someone who is an expert in website communications. If there is one freebie I can give you for that, there's a company in Chicago called Orbit Media, orbitmedia.com. Sign up for their newsletter, because the tips you're talking about, they will tell you things about hero page and how to get more signups for your newsletter and how to make sure there's not too much text on your website. So orbitmedia.com, they actually address a lot of this. So yes, a lot of the rules are similar, but because websites are tricky, because sometimes they're static and sometimes there's parts of the website that always change. So it's different depending on what the purpose of each web page is. So I would refer you to talk to someone, or at least look at Orbit Media and see what they have to say. And I mean, I can talk a little bit about that because I've taken plenty of classes from them and I love them. But I don't want to muddy up the message at all. But it's, yes, similar, but it depends on the purpose of the web page. Because if your purpose is to collect email addresses so you can have more people on your mailing list, that's going to be very different than announcing an event for your legislator. Make sense? Okay, great. And Senator, can you please give her some chocolate? Yeah, that's right. Other questions? Come on up to one of the mics.
Hi there, thank you so much. I'm Cindy from Hawaii.
Hi.
So we've recently been giving seminars on bill drafting, and some of us have had differing opinions on the nature of all the things that should be on the PowerPoint slide. So I'm very much in alignment with what you've been saying. So would you recommend having PowerPoints as such as you've been directing, and then to have kind of like the booklet, because pretty much they just wanted the booklet on the PowerPoint is what they wanted.
Yeah,
so
I like your idea of having 2 separate things better, because again, printed material we read very differently than stuff on the screen. I like the idea of how you presented it, having the slides with more text spread out, more space, but then the booklet printed for them to look at.
Okay.
And let the PowerPoint maybe just have like a key point or a key idea on each slide. Because the way a bill is written,
Right.
do you guys want to see that on PowerPoint? I don't.
It's pretty hard. to
Yeah,
put it
no
up there.
offense. I have such great respect for our state lawmakers, but yeah, I think making them two separate things. And here's the benefit too of what you're talking about, where you have something kind of big and open on PowerPoint, but then the printed material, if it does have to be detailed, like a bill, printed. Because everyone has different learning styles and because we all prefer to take in information different ways, the people who just want the high level can then look at your PowerPoint. The people who want to read and get deep down in the weeds, they will read the printed material. So I think it serves, a variety of audiences at the same time. So I think that's a great idea.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Other questions? Yay.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Porter from Children's National Health System, the pediatric hospital in Washington, D.C.
Welcome.
I would love your opinion or just general thoughts about using platforms like Prezi and Adobe Spark. I've heard mixed reviews, and I just love your opinion about it.
Thank you. So can you mention, because I've not used Adobe Spark, can you mention what Adobe Spark is for the folks in the audience, including myself?
Sure. So Adobe Spark, and I think there are some folks here from Adobe, but who can probably share much better, but it's a visual, sort of like Prezi in that it moves, but it moves right, like it moves.
It scrolls.
Right.
Yes. Okay, so did everyone hear the description of Adobe Spark? PowerPoint is a presentation software, and it's what you've seen myself and Senator O'Neill doing. We click and a slide comes up. Prezi is entirely web-based. And has anyone here seen a Prezi presentation before? It's prezi.com if you'd like to check it out. And rather than giving you slides, it is one large web page basically where you add your content. And when you are ready to move from, I would say, slide to slide or concept to concept, Prezi will zoom in and show the content, then go to your next point, and it's very zooming in and out like this. And that is what it feels like when you're watching it. Okay, Adobe Spark, similar. I don't know if it's entirely web-based, but it's same thing. All your content's in one place, but then it scrolls and shows your content. I haven't used Adobe Spark, so I can't speak to it. I have tried Prezi. A lot of younger people like it. A lot of people accuse me of being old school because I use PowerPoint. I like PowerPoint. Here are my two hiccups with Prezi, or why I kind of, here's why I don't use it. I'll just be very frank. Prezi is entirely web-based, and it is free. There are versions you can pay for, but you don't own your content. I only like to share my content with people I give it to. I do not like some corporation owning my content. So that's part of it. The other issue with Prezi is if there is someone in your room who is prone to seizures or perhaps has epilepsy and certain motions can set that off, Prezi has been known to set off seizures in people. They seem to have toned it back because that was their first iteration. I know, I didn't mean to freak all you out, but but my big issue is that it's stored on some website that some corporation has. I like having my own content. Yeah, which doesn't put me in a lot of good graces with a lot of people these days. I resist the cloud at all costs, and my husband's saying, you gotta get with it, and I say, no, I don't. But so that, I think Prezi looks beautiful. I think if you wanna try it, it's free to try. And I think it can be free forever. It's just if you want the super bells and whistles, you have to pay for it. And I will tell you, I presented alongside another young woman at Goucher College a few weeks ago, and mine was on PowerPoint and hers was on Prezi, and I just sat there going, geez, that looks amazing. So it looks good. I say try try everything and then see what works for you. My colleague who uses Prezi, she won't use anything but, and I think that's great. She also has her Prezis designed in a way that they aren't doing this awful motion that might upset some people with sensitivities. So I like PowerPoint. I know how to use it in the way it makes sense for me, so that's what I stick with. I've not tried Adobe Spark. So those are my thoughts. Thank you for asking. I hope that helps, but again, try some stuff. Good question. Other questions? Got 2 mics, no waiting. Okay, well, I also have a feeling that we're dancing up towards lunch, so we're probably getting a little hungry or dancing towards it. I'm gonna leave you with a few resources. Feel free to, I know some of you were snapping photos, but these resources are on the handout that was passed out at the start of my third part. But I'm going to just mention these to you briefly. And if you think of any other questions, just come on up and we'll take them. If you are designing slides, and even if you use Prezi or Adobe Spark, great design principles for presentations are presented by Nancy Duarte. Her first book was called Slideology. It's the one I go to all the time. What I like about Nancy Duarte's work, and she has a website too, duarte.com. She has her own company, and this is all they do. But what I like about her work is that she talks about how to design presentations for non-designers. So you don't have to be a designer, you don't have to be a graphic person. Senator, I realize you're talking about your football career. No, I'm kidding. I gotta bust out Senator O'Neill. We've been buddies. So check out Nancy Duarte. Stephanie Evergreen, who I mentioned, evergreen.com. I'm sorry, stephanieevergreen.com. Her company is called Evergreen Data, but she has a website. And again, you can either get my slides off of SlideShare starting tomorrow. If you want to find me on SlideShare, my SlideShare ID is MXSwallow. But there's also this blog post that I've referenced here where she shows you how to create a very simple, easy to read one-page handout. So I highly recommend that. Going back to what we learned in part 1, being concise and getting to the point, you can do that 140 characters exercise I gave you, or I put a short link up here. It's also on the handout. This will also be on my slides on SlideShare. The New York Times has an exercise from one of their grammar writers that will help you focus your writing. So if you want to try concise writing, go to that website. Again, it's on the handout. If you can't find it, come see me afterwards. I'll make sure I get this to you. But I thought that was a real cool exercise when I stumbled upon it. Any other questions before I turn you loose so you can go visit all the exhibit booths and have some nice lunch? Okay, I want to thank you for your time today because I know how important it is. Enjoy the rest of the summit. Thank you.